All right, it seems like people are trickling in. Hi, everyone. We're really excited for you guys to join us today for a webinar on content and SEO, Foundations for Long-Term and Sustainable Growth. We're gonna let some more people come in. We're gonna give them a few more seconds just so we can get a full room. But me and Mike are really excited to talk about all things content and SEO. I'll be taking the content section. Mike will be taking the SEO section. So we're doing a little bit of dividing and conquering. But first we can do some introductions. So my name is Lindsay Piper Shaw. I am a senior marketing consultant for Right Side Up. I work primarily on the podcast and offline team with some really great brands that are in the space. And I also work with Katie on our content strategy. Prior to Right Side Up, I did a lot of podcast and offline initiatives for brands like Quip and Lyft. And then even earlier in my career, I wrote content for a branding company, including for companies like Participant Media, which was a very fun venture. So that's kind of where I come from. Mike, do you want to tell everyone a little bit about you?
Sounds good. Hi, everyone. My name is Mike Timoney. I'm the head of client engagement and operations at Right Side Up. I'm responsible for the success of all of our client engagements across our different teams and business units. My career spans various growth leadership roles at companies such as Eventbrite, Walmart.com, front and analytics roles at Credit Karma. Started out my career in SEO, so I'm excited to talk about best practices today and share some of the trials and tribulations I've had through my career.
Yes, we're going to be dropping some tips and tricks that we've maybe learned the hard way. I won't say that, but we'll try to keep you out of the weeds. And Mike, will you tell everyone a little bit about Right Side Up?
Yeah, so Right Side Up is a hybrid growth collective and agency. We specialize in pretty much every facet of marketing with a deep emphasis on growth marketing across digital, offline, Amazon, B2B, demand gen, and affiliate. So kind of cover the full spectrum across any area of growth marketing.
Very cool. So thank you guys for joining. There's more people that trickled in, so we're excited to get started. I will be kicking things off, so forgive me as I share my screen, make sure it's working, and we'll get started here. All right. So like I said, we're going to go through content and SEO and how those can be foundations for long-term and sustainable growth. So first of all, what are we going to be covering today? So to kick us off, we're going to be talking about how you can invest in content. And then after the content section, we're going to get into the ins and outs of SEO and how to build a content-driven SEO strategy. So kind of taking both elements and combining them together. After we go through that, we will have time for Q&A. So if you do have any questions, please drop them in the Zoom question kind of chat box. And one thing to note is that we will be sharing these slides after we're done with this. So if you don't want to take notes, that's okay. We're going to be sharing that after the Zoom is over. So to start us off, let's talk about investing in content. So I think the first question we should answer is, should you even invest in content and what that entails? I want everyone to kind of understand what kind of hurdles there are in content, how much time you have to think about investing in content, the money that may go into content. And if you're comfortable with that, how do we then make that content work for you? So let's start with, should I even do this? Should I get invested in content? So there's a saying, and I'm sure you've heard, it's probably very trite by now, but you can't have all three. Fast, right, and cheap. And content is a little bit the same. We need to be thinking about personnel and time and budget. And you do need to have a combination of things to feel successful in content. So when we talk about personnel, we're talking about who's actually doing these efforts between writing and making things, and even driving the content strategy and thinking about topics and things that you want to be sharing. So that's something to consider. Another thing is time. So a lot of people think that content is on the easier side of things, where you can just put pen to paper, as they say, or, your fingers to the keyboard and write something and push it out. And after doing this for a while, that it's not that simple. And so you truly need to think about the time that you would need to invest in things like thinking about the strategy, any writing and editing work, and then what you're going to do after the content is published, which we're going to get into a little bit later. And then in terms of money, again, there's a misconception that content is something that's free or very, very cheap to make. And that certainly can be true. But if you want to use this as a strategy for growth, there will be some sort of costs associated with these efforts. So, will you be paying people for articles? Will you be hiring resources to help with the work, potentially setting up a website or a blog? Or getting other experts in the field to contribute if you do not have the time or personnel to help you. So just like that saying where you can't get all three, you may need to invest in a couple of these places to get what you want in order to get the content strategy that you are seeking. So what does this look like? So I think we need to think about 3 different areas of content to really dig into kind of how deep can you go into content as an investment. So I've broken this out into 3 different sections of strategy, creative, and publishing. The phases are kind of how deep you want to go. You can go a little bit lighter, you can go really deep. And I think with this webinar, we really want to talk about how you can go deep into this investment so you can get the most out of content. So when we're talking about strategy, this is all about value. So what are you bringing to the table? What is the knowledge that you're sharing with your audience? Why should people read or consume what you are putting out? So on the lighter side of things, that can just be thinking about, what's a topic that's relevant to your industry? What deserves just words to paper about it in a deeper dive? As we get deeper into an investment, how can you establish yourself as an authority figure? Is what you're sharing setting yourself apart from your competitors, setting yourself up as someone who has a knowledge that others might not? And then in the last phase, it's thinking about, okay, if I'm providing this knowledge, how can that contribute to growth in our business? Why should people come to you to buy something, to partner with you, etc.? On the creative side, the things to think about are, can you bring a full idea to creation? One thing to note is that we have tons of smart people that do their jobs really well, but not everyone is a natural writer. And that's something that you may not realize as you go to write yourself. You may feel comfortable writing, but if you are bringing in your coworkers or colleagues to help write content, they may have a great idea, but actually putting it down on paper can be a little bit more difficult to ensure that the final piece is super professional. So thinking about that, about how you're going to execute a really professional piece and whether or not your team can do this is kind of the first wave of thinking. Then we're thinking about, can you be consistent about putting articles out or putting content out in whichever format that you choose? So can you talk about interesting subjects and diverse subjects, truly, with different contributors over the course of a long period of time? And then finally, are you going to be evolving this content? Are you going to be doing different kind of channels, different types of content? Will you be working with external partners, truly milking the best out of what you're putting out into the ecosystem with your knowledge? Like, can you take it to the next level? And then for publishing, you thinking about, how do people find your content? Where do they go? How will you house it? And this can be something like a blog on your website. You can push it out to Medium, which is a little bit of a wider audience to start you out. But more than that, moving into phase 2 or 3, how can you incorporate social strategy to reach more people? So if you're putting it out on your blog, if you're putting it out on Medium, that is great. But how do you get more people to read it? Because you've worked so hard to put it together. It truly deserves to have a wider scope of who's listening or who's reading. And then something we'll talk about in a bit with Mike is, how do you invest in your SEO strategy to maximize these efforts? So that's kind of the final phase of this, of if you want to really invest in content, these are the things to start thinking about as you try to get to that final phase of it being a core strategy for growth. Okay, so if I haven't scared you off yet, if you're like, yes, I really want to create something, I want to make some content, what type of content should I be thinking about? So one of the first things you can think about are written articles, guides, how-tos. This can also be white papers or ebooks, just blog posts, and also something fun. You could do quizzes, just anything written that you can post online. So some of the benefits of doing this is that you do have flexibility on what the length will be, what you're talking about. You have some flexibility on, editing it with your team and guarding valuable information. With this method, you can edit it to death and cut it down to its core. You should still remember that you do want to be adding value to your audience. So you don't want to guard too much, but you do have that opportunity to kind of pull back on the reins, make sure that you're not sharing too much to competitors or anyone that you wouldn't want getting that information. This type of content is really easy to share and you can repurpose it. So one of the things to think about is, can you take this article or this written content and repurpose it on social, on email, even paid social? And with this, you can also try to team up with external publishers or hire other subject matter experts. Other things to think about, which is kind of a deeper dive, is a webinar or a fireside chat. So something like this, where you're getting up and you're sharing slides, you're collaborating with someone who is also an expert in a certain subject matter, like Mike is with SEO, really digging in deep and being able to share assets or information to a smaller group of people potentially. But there is a really high value add in that. And it feels like you're getting insider information, and that can be really powerful for people to feel like they got some sort of benefit and knowledge from what you're presenting. So this potentially can require some more effort. And Katie is probably laughing because she has put so much effort into making these webinars happen. So we really appreciate her. But it does require additional effort to get attendees, to make sure that they feel comfortable joining, that they have what they need and understand where to go. Post COVID-19, this may be something like event planning. If you wanted to do a live fireside chat or actually talk to someone in person, which feels like a luxury these days, but that could take just time to prep, time to get a space. That could also require an investment in terms of money as well. With this, you do have less control over information. You can make a deck, but when push comes to shove, if someone gets in front of the microphone like I am, potentially you don't have control over what they say to the fullest extent. So that could be a point of concern and just something to think about as you're deciding what type of content you should be investing in. Another benefit, though, is that you can reuse this information. So just as we are sharing these slides with you after the fact, you can reuse this information to repurpose for articles or how-tos and share that where you would like. And then finally, another benefit is email capture or information capture. So you'll understand who is attending these webinars, who's attending these fireside chats, and you can communicate with them and potentially open up that line of communication. And then finally, I think this is something that is getting more and more popular more recently. And this is either making a podcast for your brand or for your company, or being a guest on someone else's podcast to share your knowledge base. So podcasts can be a more casual way of disseminating information. I think if you listen to podcasts, you understand that it can be very conversational, it's chit-chatty. The subject matter expert on the show may feel a little bit more at ease because it feels like you're chatting with a friend. This could also mean that you don't get as much control over information that's going out, whether it's you and you are, you can control yourself and if you're a guest, but if your teammate or your colleague is going on, they may have ideas of what they want to talk about. But when you get to the actual interview, making sure that you're disseminating the right information can be a little bit of a challenge. And then if you are thinking about making your own podcast, which I think is very popular to think about for companies, it does require know-how or money to get involved, just because there are production efforts that are needed. And just getting that up and running just takes a little bit of knowledge in the front end of it. And then another thing to think about with podcast guesting is that this also requires time and research. So finding the right guesting spots and the right types of shows to disseminate information is really important. You don't want to get on a show where it just doesn't make sense for you to be there. So those are kind of the ways that you can think about content and kind of little pockets of places you can explore, whether you are making it or writing it. So things to think about for how the content should be a part of your strategy. So once you've thought about, okay, I do want to do this. Okay, I've thought about the different ways that I can produce content. This all sounds great. How do I make the content work for me? So what we really want to do is set a goal like it's a growth marketing channel. So, the purpose of this is to think about long-term growth. You're putting so much investment into your content. We really want it to work for you. So we need to treat this as if it was a growth marketing channel and a growth driver. So thinking about some goals, and some are a little bit softer than others, like awareness or the ability to give thought leadership opportunities to your colleagues. I think those are very important. But some other things to think about if you're setting a goal like a growth marketing channel is, are you getting email capture? Is it top funnel email capture? Is it something like bottom funnel, which is a client lead or an acquisition or a sale? If you're setting those goals and you can measure your content efforts, I think that is really important to understanding, one, how it's working for you, and two, how you can optimize going forward and keep making this channel work for you. So again, just like to hit this home, you really do need to invest in appropriate resources depending on your goals. And I think that includes just personnel, the right place to distribute your content, and money to invest in people or resources. And this also includes SEO, which we will get into in a bit. So if you have a goal, you have the content, where should you think about distributing your content? So there's a couple places like social, which can include Facebook, Twitter, LinkedIn. Like I said before, you can have this be organic, just kind of on your company socials, or you can repurpose it for paid social, which is really an interesting thing that you may want to use that as an asset. You could do internal website, blog, or your newsletter, Slack groups. Not everyone may have a newsletter. Not everyone may have a social following. So you can get creative with other external resources too, if you want to be able to share it. So journals, relevant websites, or even influencer partners. Like if you have content that is relevant to the consumer and someone like an affiliate partner or an influencer can share your brand values in a really organic way, that can be a creative way to share that too if the other channels are not as robust as potentially an influencer's network would be. And then finally, search. We really want this content to be optimized by SEO. I think that that's a really powerful way to make your content work for you, and Mike will share more on that. Before I hand it off to Mike, I do want to talk just really quickly about the differences for B2B and B2C. So, we understand that the messaging may be very different depending on the product. And if you're in business to business, I think what is really important is sharing that knowledge and positioning yourself as a point of authority on a certain subject matter. So when people are reading your content, they understand that if they were to go to you, you would be able to help them with a problem. You understand the marketplace, you understand the challenges that they're up against, and you're the resource that they should rely on. And for B2C, this truly is more of an emotional journey, and there is a way to create that brand affinity and sharing your brand values so that when a consumer is making a decision, they think of you in a positive light. And there's also a point of knowledge and authority sharing with B2C, but I would say that B2C is more of an emotional narrative and helps with decision making on its face. So when you're thinking about this and writing and making content, I would truly think about, if you're B2B or B2C, is this a person that's reading this professionally, or is this a person that's reading it for personal purposes? So ultimate goal of content is to create knowledge, share your authority, and give information to your audience in a pleasant and professional way. So once you have put all that effort in, we really want it to continue to work for you. So we should start thinking about investing in SEO. So I'm going to hand it over to Mike to start that section.
Excellent segue. Thank you, Lindsay. All right, so hopefully everyone can see my screen. All right. So before I dive in, I want to share a few quick high level thoughts. So when thinking about investing in SEO, I have this conversation a lot with a variety of folks at a variety of stages of company, and they may have dabbled in SEO in the past, and it was kind of more of a project based thing, or they're fairly sophisticated and they've kind of baked it into their content development and product best practices. The things I'd want to share are SEO is nebulous in some ways, and I think it's a discipline that sometimes folks have a hard time wrapping their heads around, namely how to predict the results that they're going to get. But I'd also emphasize that while I admit it is nebulous in some ways, the best practices are pretty well defined. And there's a lot of very talented folks out there who have, a host of experience driving SEO initiatives across content and technical practices. So it is certainly something we strongly advocate for investing in and building the foundation. And I'm going to dive into kind of what that looks like in practice. So, every marketer loves to think about what are your levers? What can you pull to drive results? So there are kind of, a couple different fundamental areas of SEO that I would create kind of pillars around. So, the three pillars of SEO at the most basic level are your technical crawlability. Can search engines get to your site? Can they effectively extract all the signals and information that they need to effectively rank your site on the things that you care about, the keywords you care about, and the content you care about? Off-page site optimization. So, this is basically like the things I'd highlight on that are your backlink profile. That's obviously a heavily weighted variable in search algorithms, namely Google. And I'll dive into a bit more about what that looks like. And then on-page and site optimization, which is really the one that's most relevant to kind of the intersection of content and SEO. It's one of the most controllable aspects and pillars of SEO, and we'll spend a good amount of time on that. So diving into number one, you can write the best content. It doesn't matter if a search engine can't find it. So that really brings us to technical SEO and how your site is set up and the management of it. So crawlability is critical. You want to make sure the search engines can hit your site, they can navigate through it, they can crawl everything that you want them to get. A couple different ways this manifests. And I'm not going to go into like every single dimension of SEO, but kind of the big ones. Robots.txt. This is a file that lives off your root domain. It's one of the first things that, if not the first, that search engines check. It allows you, it has kind of multiple applications. One is you can actually use it to block content that you don't want users and you don't want search engines to find. So there is it's not like a binary decision of like, oh, I have one or I don't. It's like, it gives the signals of like what search engines should crawl and what they shouldn't. So it's a really important thing to know kind of what's in your robots.txt file and ensure that search engines are finding what they need to find. Another big one is your redirect profile. This gets into kind of more of the, there are two kind of fundamental types of redirects. There's server-side redirect and there's client-side redirect, which is kind of at the browser level. Redirects send different signals to search engines. They all happen behind the scenes. For example, when a search engine hits your homepage, there will be a server response code that they get back. That basically they interpret these different response codes as different ways to interact with your site. So the standard one is 200, like this is okay, like crawl through it, index it, everything's cool. And then the one everyone sees kind of in practice, 404, and that's a page not found. Search engines view that as a weak signal. They don't want to index a bunch of pages that don't have anything on them. I've seen instances where people have content that they want crawled and they're returning a 404 code. So there are ways that can go awry and definitely something to keep an eye on. And then a very basic one is, and we'll dive a bit into Google Search Console. You can actually send an XML sitemap to Google to tell them kind of here's the hierarchy of the site, here's what we want you to see, and here's what we want you to interact with. And there are a lot of tools that enable you to do kind of these basic checks. Like the most baseline one that I recommend to everyone, and I'm surprised sometimes when companies don't have it, is set up your Google Search Console and have it configured so that you can get basic diagnostics on your site. And then there are other tools out there like Screaming Frog that will give you kind of a really robust view of your site and the health of it and kind of what's going on, and allow you to extract a really powerful view of what's there. Another piece of technical SEO is your site architecture. So, site architecture benefits both search engines and the end user hitting your site. Google kind of unofficially says like you should just design everything for the user and it will benefit search engines. And I think that that's a really great kind of leading principle as you think through this. So the ways that kind of manifests that I would prioritize as kind of the top ones are, URL structures. Like when you think about the taxonomy of your site, you have kind of your main content areas or your main categories if you're in e-commerce living off that domain, and it kind of spider webs down from there. And you want to kind of, and I'll dive into more of on the on-site and on-page side, like what that actually looks like. But you want to map keywords and think about how does this kind of navigate through? Because, if a user can look at it and say like, oh, okay, I'm on, e-commerce site.com. I'm going to the men's section, men's shoes, subcategory of men's shoes, like men's, athletic shoes, and then a product level page. It's a very clear kind of navigation path to create a lot of fluency through of what the keyword themes are that the user is navigating. And the same would extend to a search engine, kind of being able to build that profile of relevancy. Another is canonical tags. So not the strongest signal, but important if you have the possibility, like, and this happens from time to time as sites kind of grow and evolve, you might have multiple pages that have similar content, and canonical tags are a good way to kind of point everyone back to like, this is the actual main page that we want to rank for this set of content. And it's a great kind of easy, lightweight way to publish to your site and have that there. And it's a best practice for sure, and not a super heavy lift for most people. And then structured data. This one is more specific to, like, if you think about the classic example is like a recipe site where you have very standardized fields and you want to pass back structured data to Google, which can be really beneficial as a signal and making sure that they're getting the right information and presenting it in search result pages. If applicable, this can be a very important thing that people focus on. Page site speed. This is a heavily weighted variable. It's for very probably obvious reasons to most people. Is Google wants to make sure wherever they're sending their users, they're getting a good experience. And we all know that we're impatient. You click through a link, if it takes 5 seconds for a page to load, like, you're kind of frustrated. You want to get right to the experience, get the information you need, transact, whatever it is. And Google really cares about that because they too have, a lot of investment in the user experience and the end result that's happening off of Google. So page and site speed is incredibly important as a variable that they look at. And there are multiple ways I could list, 20 probably off the top of my head, but like limiting redirects, making sure content lives where it needs to live, heavy files, lots of JavaScript, like things that just slow down the server response time. And then, images and alt tags and stuff like that, like making sure the right pieces are there. And I mentioned this previously, but, there are a lot of different tools that you can use to kind of check, the health of your site at the most basic level. And, the non-negotiables, again, are Search Console. I would definitely recommend Screaming Frog as a free tool. Ahrefs, Moz is a great keyword rank checker. And then Google obviously provides the site speed checker for free. So anyone can use that and plug in. So one thing kind of tying back to the broader thing is, or the broader concepts is, the foundation of any SEO strategy is really an audit and a baseline to understand kind of where you are today, given how nebulous it can be, and kind of understanding where you want to invest. an audit can really help you understand, okay, this is where I am now against my goals, whether it's keyword, traffic, whatever. An audit will give you kind of a structured view of your site, allow you to address any issues, especially on the technical side, and then baseline kind of the key KPIs that people think about at the top of the funnel, which is, traffic and keyword rankings, which are obviously closely tied for SEO. And then another thing that I get asked a lot from sophisticated growth marketers is, who maybe are thinking about SEO, is, how do I measure the lift? How do I know it's incremental? And the real answer is there's not a clean way to do that. Like if you think about paid social, so like Facebook, for example, obviously there are really sophisticated ways that you can measure the incrementality of your channel, establish your incremental CPA on the investment. SEO, it does not afford that given kind of the construct of the channel. So you're really looking at more of a pre-post view, which can still be really powerful. But it is a bit more limited in terms of the ways that you can kind of capture the ROI in a very statistical lens. So I'm going to spend a little bit of time on off-page site signals. This is like, it's incredibly important, but it's also, it's probably my least favorite area because it gets talked about so much and it's so hard to influence. But people, when they dive into SEO, they often think about like, okay, how do I get a bunch of links to my site? Because I know that's super important. I know that Google weights that variable very highly. The answer is like, there's a lot of ways to do it. There are nefarious ways known more as black hat, paying for links, other like, getting involved in link farms and stuff like that. And I would just say that Google is very sophisticated at knowing when that's happening. And it often is, as is implied by its name of its practice as black hat, it's definitely not something you want to get involved in. And there are, millions of war stories out there about sites getting penalized, getting completely blacklisted and things like that we've seen throughout the years. So, as you think about kind of what are the primary types of backlinks, there are three kind of segments that are three sections I would highlight. There's organic, which is like, just what happens naturally by creating a great product, great content, being a thought leader, having a great user experience for your users. Like people will want to link to you as a result of doing those things. So it actually has nothing to do with SEO. It's literally down to like, what are you doing from a business standpoint? And what types of value are you creating for your users and for your audience? There is some manual action you can take. Like you can ask partners, influencers, other folks that you might have a relationship with in your business to link to your content. And there's really nothing wrong with that on the surface. Like it's fairly common. It's a good way to leverage kind of the relative strength of partner domains and kind of share that. But I would just say like, tread carefully there, make sure, it's when you pursue those types of things that it's through the lens of adding value to the end user and to your customer and not any other reason. And if you kind of stick to that, I think everything will be fine. And then the last is kind of this other, and there's a lot of different ways that you can accomplish this, but like the classic example is, self-placed in various directories and third-party sites like discovery sites. I'm going to date myself, but there was a directory called DMOZ back in the mid 2000s, and it was kind of discovered that it was somewhat weighted by Google's algorithm. So like all of a sudden you have all these people who are like applying to be editors of different categories, and all these companies that were kind of savvy to it were submitting their listings in DMOZ, and there was inherently nothing wrong with that, and it did in some ways benefit them. And that type of stuff still does exist, but I would say that Google is pretty sophisticated at understanding like kind of the earned versus self-imposed type of linking. So I wouldn't say that that's like a huge lever when you're thinking about offsite optimization. So best practices on off-page, off-site is really like, focus on what you can control. And really what that boils down to is, create great content. And content not just being like thought leadership content if you're like a SaaS business, and you're trying to build an audience and drive adoption of your product, but also like on the e-commerce side, like making sure your product and item pages are optimized for the keywords that you're thinking about, and you're writing content and descriptions on those pages that users really care about and they'll get a lot of value from. And if you focus on that, like everything will be great, and it will continue to drive relevancy. Leverage your unique advantages. Like some products naturally have distribution or have like unique advantages built in to the product itself. So like one that's a firsthand experience is Eventbrite. I previously worked there. One of the main advantages that business had was this kind of local plus all of these event type themes that enabled the business to create all this real estate optimized for these various keyword variants, and created a lot of just natural opportunity to drive traffic via organic search ranking. So when you think about your SEO strategy, it's important to think about like what unique advantages do I have as a business in the industry I'm in and the vertical I'm in, and kind of tailor things according to that. And there are different use cases for each, so it's important to use that as part of the baseline. And then quality, not quantity. So like everything in life, like quality is the most important thing, and you can get a bunch of really bad backlinks and it's not going to do anything for you. And you can get you can get like a small number of really high quality backlinks, and it can drive a lot of relevancy and value for your site. So it's not just about the number, it's about creating value for your user and focusing on the quality of what's pointing back to you. All right, so diving into this is probably my favorite part, and probably the most interesting for this webinar, kind of tying back to some of the content best practices that Lindsay spoke to. So on-page optimization, it's short-term wins and building a long-term foundation. So the way that I tell a lot of folks when they think about diving into SEO, it kind of goes back to, you got to baseline yourself on where you are today. And that can come in a lot of very kind of tangible and basic ways. So, the first is obviously like establish where you are with your organic traffic. What does it look like, trended over time? How much of your mix is it, and things like that. And kind of looking at, where I am right now and where I want to go. And, and the ways that kind of comes together are looking at what are the keywords you care about for the content you have on your site. And then building the baseline of, this is where I am, this is where I'm ranking, these are the keywords I care about, how I'm performing, and then these are the ones that I want to rank on. I think they're relevant to my business, and I want to start building a plan around how I get there. And then one thing that's very, very basic, but this is like, if I were diving into a site, first day, thinking about what's my SEO plan, mapping out my keywords, like take the URL, map the keyword you're ranking on, any changes you want to make. If you feel like, oh, this piece of content is actually better for this keyword, and start to map out where are your gaps, what are the opportunities, and then kind of build from there. And it's such a straightforward thing to do. And it's something any marketing person can do, even if they're not an SEO expert, and kind of just have that as your mapping and your baseline that you want to build things off of. So when you're diving in, you're thinking about SEO and building content, kind of the core elements that I would consider that are incredibly important. Your title tags, making sure they're keyword targeted, making sure they're descriptive of what either the homepage content or category all the way down to content piece or item level pages. They actually get pulled through into search results. So this is also important and not something a lot of people know. So when you present a title tag in your content, it actually is what appears in a Google search result. So in a way, you're kind of creating, if you're doing paid search, for example, you're kind of creating your ad, your organic ad. And there's a lot of importance in making sure that that is, unique and descriptive of the content, keyword targeted, and ultimately promotes the user to click through. So it can have an impact on your traffic via just sharing better information about what the page actually is. And when you reinforce the keyword that the user searched and they see in the search results, like, oh, it's exactly what I searched for, showing up in the clickable link in a search result, like naturally that's going to drive more engagement and improvement in that listing. Metadata is the subtext of the clickable link in search. So again, describing your page a little bit about what the user is about to click through on can really benefit your click-through rate. I touched upon URL structure in the technical section. So clean, keyword targeted. It's a strong ranking signal, drives relevance. Users even look at that stuff, and it can have a bit of a more subtle effect on how a user interacts with the site and SEO values. So incredibly important. Internal linking. So finding opportunities to create more both navigation paths within your existing content. If a user reads an article that you wrote and you have, in the content of the article, you mention some other topic that you happen to have written content on, linking off to that content so the user can then navigate to that. It also is somewhat of a signal that search engines will look at. And it's a chance for you to send another relevancy signal to other content you have in your site taxonomy. Header tags, otherwise known H1s, H2s. You can reinforce keyword themes. Not the most weighted signal in search engine algorithms, but is an important piece and also helps the user most importantly. And then page content optimization. So this is like keyword density within the actual content on the page. Are you reinforcing the keyword that you're optimizing that piece of content or that product or item for? And repetition can drive some relevance. It can reaffirm with the user that that's what that page is all about. And I get asked the question a lot of like, well, how much repetition should I have in my content and things like that. The rough number I always give is like maybe a mention of the keyword for every 40 to 50 words of content for like a density ratio. But it's very kind of variable, and you should definitely always write your content for the user and not to just rank in search or send a signal to search algorithms. All right, so diving in, tying it all back to building a content-driven SEO strategy. So as if I've kind of reinforced this throughout, but there's really no one-size-fits-all answer for SEO. It's different for everyone. You kind of have to look at it through the lens of where you're starting and where you want to go. But as always, take stock and audit your existing content, figure out where you're successful today and where the gaps are. Keyword discovery, kind of figuring out what are you relevant for, what do you want to rank for. There's a couple different kind of free tools out there that I would strongly recommend. Google Search Console, again, as like the baseline of SEO. Get that set up if you don't have it. Look at paid search campaign performance data. That can be a great signal if you've already invested in paid search, and you'll have a good understanding of what keywords are actually performing for you already on your site, and you can use that as a baseline to start to think about where to invest. Google has a keyword planner tool kind of baked into AdWords. You can use that to get very indexed views of how popular keywords are, because that's obviously a big piece of finding the intersection between keyword traffic opportunity and relevancy to your site, and kind of the elasticity of the two in terms of what you can actually optimize for. Google Trends can be interesting to look at another index view of kind of aggregate search interest to see kind of how are various keywords or themes trending over time. Are they growing? Are they shrinking? Could be another signal for you to determine your investment. And then obviously competitive research, look at your competitors, look at what they're optimizing for. It doesn't mean that they're doing the right things, but it's an important input to see if there are additional ideas that you may not have found through these other efforts, and can drive some of that prioritization. And then I spoke to this already, but I can't emphasize enough the keyword mapping, taxonomy document, just grounding yourself, having something that's kind of codified. That's a view of your site, where you are today and what you want to build off of. And then, as mentioned, strategies will vary. It's different for everyone. I strongly recommend an SEO expert kind of weighing in if it's something that you're not comfortable doing yourself. Somebody who is well versed in kind of digging through sites and determining what the right practices are and where to focus, and that can be a really efficient way to kickstart your SEO strategy. So in summary, this is kind of broader to just content and SEO. Remember your objectives. Like, it's important to always just, I've seen a lot of companies who kind of say, oh, we're going to do SEO, or we're going to build content. And they kind of do view it as a project, and they kind of throw a bunch of resources at it, and then they mark it as done. I would say neither is something that's project-based. It's more of an ongoing effort that's baked into your core strategy. On that, build your strategy up front, refine it over time. Kind of ties back to the basics and grounding yourself on where you are. This is probably the most important thing when framing SEO. Is there are short-term wins for sure, and it varies for everyone, but there are very basic optimizations you can do that can drive improvements and incremental lift. But it's also a long-term play. Investing in Facebook, investing in search, like, the beauty of those is that we get the results quickly and we can learn quickly. But the downside is it's competitive. It can be expensive. CPMs fluctuate, things like that. So it's a hard game to play kind of in a vacuum. So SEO and content, for that matter, can be very complementary if you start to invest in them for the long term and build that kind of foundational growth into your acquisition strategy. Strategies vary based on your business. It's going to be very different for a SaaS product versus a big e-commerce site. It's just going to be different variables, different focus areas, but kind of all tying back to the same fundamentals. And just more generally, and this is kind of the drum that I always beat, is the best growth strategy is a diversified one. Play the long game. You paid and organic have very solidified places in a diversified growth strategy, and it's important to do both and not over-index on just one. Okay, and with that, we can open up to Q&A.
Awesome. So we have some questions, and if you do have any questions about either content or SEO or the intersection between the two, you can drop them in the Q&A section. But Mike, we have a question from Sarah. So she asked, can you re-explain internal linking? Does that mean linking to the other on-site content from your website page?
Yes, it does. So internal linking can be site navigation. So your main navigation at the top of a web page, all the way to inline linking within the content of your site to promote user navigation throughout various pieces of content, as well as some benefit to keyword relevancy. So it kind of extends to both your site taxonomy as well as kind of opportunistically taking advantage of. You may have a diversified content strategy. You may have a lot of great content naturally within the copy on a piece of content. You can strategically link to other pieces of content with a keyword focused anchor text, and that can be a very beneficial way, kind of mostly focused on the user experience and being able to find other pieces, which can have a more holistic effect on your SEO strategy.
Awesome. And we have another question from Brian. So Brian, this is an interesting question. If my keyword research reveals that there are hundreds of potential keywords for me to target, how do I go about narrowing down which keywords are most important and ultimately create content for?
That is a wonderful question. So at the surface level, the way that I would answer that is I would look at the keyword opportunity, right? In terms of, I spoke to the data that you have at your disposal, which spans everything from, if you do have an SEM strategy in place, looking at performance data, you might use it as a way to offset some of the costs by creating organic content. as well as Google keyword tool to get a sense of like, okay, these are the highest opportunity keywords for me based on just volume of searches and thus kind of available traffic to capture. But then, and this is where it does get very complicated, is looking at other signals like, who is ranking on this, and do I think that my content is similar? Because you can kind of triangulate what the signals are that that Google is kind of exposing via search results. So I would start to look at like, do I think that my content or the content I'm about to create, I can effectively rank on this? My product or my site or an authority on this topic, or it's more of a stretch? And kind of it's a very hard question to answer how you prioritize, but using kind of the data signals as well as somewhat of intuition as marketers of like, I think that this directly maps to my content or the intention of my product or whatever it is. Can really get you pretty far in terms of creating a prioritized list to then invest against.
Great. So another question from Sean. I'm new to Google Search Console. Are there a few practical use cases for using GSC on a regular basis?
Yeah. So it'll give you, at the most basic level, Search Console gives you diagnostics on your site. So like it can identify crawl issues. It'll also give you kind of basic traffic information on your site, what keywords are referring traffic to your site straight from Google. So daily use, weekly use, some variant thereof to kind of monitor how things are performing. I would definitely recommend it as part of your kind of weekly kind of operations when you're thinking about SEO. And there's a lot of really interesting information. It's obviously straight from the horse's mouth, the horse being Google. So I would strongly recommend it.
Great. Another question from Sarah. Can you share anchor text best practices? Should we only hyperlink keywords and never use click here?
Great question. There was like, again, I'm going to date myself, but there was like an old example from a long time ago where I forget who it was, but somebody used the anchor text, basically click here, like tens of thousands of times across a very large website. And if you went to Google and just search click here, their site was ranking #1. And obviously like Google has become much more sophisticated since then. But as an example, like click here sends very little signal to Google unless your goal is to rank on click here. So using the keyword, that you care about for the, like, for example, like if you'd link to, I'll just keep using the shoes example. If you link to like, if you're on like a category page for women's shoes and you link to men's shoes, obviously you're sending the signal that like the page the user is about to land on is men's shoes, and back to search engines that page is all about men's shoes, as a very simplified example. So always a best practice to use the keyword that you want the destination of that link to rank on.
Great. And this is kind of a question from two people. Do you have any examples of well-known companies that have found lots of success from content SEO that could serve as a reference point for what we may be able to get out of the channel? This was also a question from Annie and Josh.
There certainly are. I'm trying to think. We could maybe take it as a follow-up to share, where I could pull together a short list of sites I feel are doing really kind of best in class content SEO.
Yeah.
And I can kind of break it out by different verticals and industries, because to my earlier comments, it's very different based on each. So I'd be happy to follow up with a few examples.
Awesome. Yeah, I think that'd be great to pull together a list of examples, because that was a question from two people. Any tips or things to consider for SEO if our company only operates in one market, for example, NYC?
Well, the focus is going to be heavily, it sounds like it's going to be heavily geo based. And I think the based on the question and kind of the high level, I think the approach is still the same. It's just going to be more driven by the keywords themselves and kind of how that maps to a business that's more geo focused. But no, at the surface, I don't view the strategy as being drastically different.
Great. And then let's take it back to Mike, your men's shoes article. So what are your recommendations in terms of URL structure? Specifically, should you do website.com/category/what are men's shoes versus something like website.com/what are men's shoes?
Yeah, it very much depends on the site taxonomy. This is one of the reasons why I feel very strongly that the mapping document is very important, and using even a tool like Screaming Frog to just pull what the site looks like right now in terms of the taxonomy.
Mhm.
There are benefits to having content live, in kind of category, subcategory type of structure. There are benefits to having content live off the root domain. There's no kind of one size fits all. It really depends on kind of what your broader catalog of content looks like and how to best structure that for the combination of user navigation to how search engines are going to interact with it and build keyword themes. So somewhat of a non-answer. It's highly dependent, but it is something that somebody versed in SEO can kind of dive into and build a recommendation kind of around the comprehensive view.
Great, great. And then another question just came in, and potentially this could be a follow-up, but Mike, if you have any off the top of your head, can you recommend any good articles or books for getting a better handle on technical SEO?
Google has this isn't my ultimate answer, but I would definitely say that Google has some pretty good kind of basic documentation in I forget what section it is, but we can follow up with the link. I'm a big fan of Moz and what they do. They've built the entire kind of Moz practice and ecosystem around SEO best practices, and they have a lot of really great content in the community and a lot of content that spans everything from just getting started types of content to very specific issues or optimizations that people are doing. So Moz is the one that I read from time to time to kind of keep up to speed on what's going on.
Awesome. So that looks like we're at the end of our Q&As to get through, and we're almost at the end of time. So I'd just like to say thank you everyone for joining. We'll follow up with some of those resources we talked about to give you some examples of people that are doing this great, doing SEO and content in a great way. So thank you so much. We hope this was helpful, and we hope you'll join us for our next Right Side Up webinar. If you want to reach out to us and get in touch, please reach out to growth@rightsideup.co, or you can go to our website at rightsideup.com. All right. Thank you, guys.
Thanks, everyone.